What the hell is happening at Lethal Esports? Let's get straight to the point without wasting any time. In April of 2022, Lethal announced their roster with Marzel, Sensei, Android, Rafa, Lucia having already signed Rossi and acquiring Cybele as well. While the roster was rather one-sided, with only Marzel and partly Rafa being the real T1 experienced players, they were hoping for the best with these two and the other youngsters, but it wasn't the sweetest fruit. Lethal's results on screen weren't nearly half as bad as what was actually going on with the org itself, right down to the center. Whilst Lethal started their journey as an underdog team in the Indian esports scene, they mostly had rather mid-ranged results, finishing third or below in practically almost every tournament they played. Success was a word that they were kind of a little away from, but that didn't really stop them from trying everything that they could as an org. And in the beginning, they seemed like, the name for tier 2 underdogs who could actually make a name for themselves. But this could only go on for so long because a body that's rotten from the center will only spread disease across the entire body. They started some problems at the Lethal bootcamp, which included mainly one player named Sensei who was not being paid on time his salary and his tournament winnings at all. And after a while, Sensei was also benched by Lethal. Now, this obviously wasn't a good look for Lethal because benching a player for reasons that were not disclosed when he was actually performing really well was clearly not a good look on them. We don't know at that point what was going on in the inside, what the talks were, but eventually Lethal came under fire. This went on for quite some time, and Sensei then took to social media finally to explain what exactly had happened to him. And when he did come out with this, a lot of people, and I mean a lot, practically the entire community came to his support asking why he was not being paid on time, what is happening with Lethal, whilst Lethal was just ignoring the public at large and Sensei himself as well. This went on for months as Sensei was stuck in contractual hell. Neither could he get out of it because he didn't have enough money to buy himself out of that contract. Neither was Lethal letting him play on the main lineup. And apart from all of that, he was not even getting paid for his tournament winnings nor his salary on time either. The delays were insane. The battle was pretty ugly until finally in November of 2022, Sensei was released from his contract, but was still not paid his dues. In January of this year, Sensei took to Twitter again to lash out, not particularly lash, but rather explain his concerns that Lethal had not paid his tournament winning dues for 10 months now. And that obviously is way too long a time to understand why the hell has somebody not been paid what is duly there. Usually, according to practically any contract, it is 70-30, and that's what even Sensei mentioned in this tweet. But according to him, Lethal just were ignoring him outright completely. And ironically, on the one tweet where he did mention that it's been 10 months, Lethal replied to him there saying, "We'll look into this and get back to you." Now, we don't know whether they looked into this or they got back to him, but he was not the only one floating in this boat. Rafa, who was another player at Lethal, was also going through the same thing, but rather quietly, unfortunately. Sensei put that up months ago, and we still don't know whether him and Rafa got their tournament winnings paid or not. Fast forward to March, the rosters, the teams, everything was announced by both Nodwin and the orgs themselves. Everything seemed to be ready, we're going into it, and Lethal was to be playing in this tournament as well. And this is where two concerns arose for most of the audience, I believe, and for myself, which we didn't quite understand. Number one, that Lethal decided to stick with their roster of having Rossi, Lucia, Marzel, added in Shivi and Kel'Thuzad. And of course, Cybele as the 6th player. Now, this, if you look at this roster up front, you cannot say that this is a tier 1 Valorant roster that's going to compete at the highest level. Because of the mere fact that whilst Lucia and Rossi were CSGO legends, they've done some amazing stuff in that game, they were just not cut out for Valorant. They did not find the success that they were hoping for. And a lot of other players who made the transition before them passed by them by huge distances to get to where they are today. This was nowhere near a tier 1 org in my opinion. And concern number 2 was that Nodwin, did they really check the background of Lethal's finances, workings, operations after all that happened between them and Sensei and Rafa? It didn't quite seem likely, because if there was something done, or maybe if Lethal convinced them that they've got everything, maybe that's why they played, but they played either way. And leaving all of that aside, Lethal Esports themselves had a questionable roster that I believe just did not deserve to be there, except for Marzel, of course. And here's where the biggest thing happened. On the 18th of March, where everything about VCL South Asia was to begin, the matches were supposed to start, Lethal Esports dropped this bomb on Twitter telling everybody about what exactly happened with Sensei. A year later, the entire drama started. A statement that said that they found Sensei breaking a term of their contract and hence he will not be paid, why he was not paid, and that they are thrilled to tell this to his lawyer. Like a statement that took them a year, which was basically factless. There was no proof. They didn't tell what exactly was the contract term that he breached. All of this, just a random statement, and then never followed up on it. Never said anything. We didn't get anything from Sensei either, except for this tweet where he said that he's going to ready up his side of the statement and all the finances and everything. I mean, sure, okay. Lethal took pretty long to think of this short statement, put it out on Twitter. They were clearly very thrilled to tell everybody about this and Sensei, because no wonder they took 2 months of time to finally pay a player 1 month's worth of salary, not giving him his tournament earnings at all. Coming to the roster itself though, in present time, VCL SA, Lethal Esports were by far the worst team to play in Tier 1 that we've seen so far ever. Rossi and Lucia were just not as good as they were in CSGO. Kel'Thuzad was a budding talent who just got nervous and probably just could not perform at the best. And whilst all of this was happening, there were changes in the squad. Cybele stepped in a couple of games. A lot of things happening, and I'm pretty sure that the environment that was there in the background of this org caused players also to have discourse among them. Shivi also was coming off of a very long break from Valorant, having not played professionally for quite some time, and Mazel being the only star player in that roster who carried this team single-handedly across most maps which they didn't even win. Lethal's decision to keep these players was far beyond my comprehension, because everybody knew that this is definitely not a Tier 1 roster. They either did this on the back of financials, maybe because they didn't have enough money to acquire better players, which obviously they wouldn't tell out loud, or they just don't know how Valorant works, or don't know how their players work. I don't know. Lethal clearly had some sort of an issue with this roster. They were just plain devoid of understanding how Tier 1 works and what players they actually might need to compete at a better level. Either way, this roster was one that you could look at and say this did not belong in that group of 10, except for Mazel being the only exception. End of the league, of course, we saw Lethal finish dead last. But the manner in which they lost every single game was downright disappointing. They finished winning just one map across 4 BO3, which was also as inconsequential as it could get. With a round differential of -51, Lethal were the worst team at VCL SA Split 1. And with the way things were looking, the changes made, I'm sure that these players definitely had some sort of a disagreement, falling out. What this though was on screen. Teams obviously can have problems when they lose. They get angry, they get emotional about it, they think about the mistakes that their teammates made or they made. But let's have a look at what exactly happened behind the scenes. Lethal got kicked out of the league for reasons that are not officially out yet, but we all know what's going on. Most recently, it came out in the open that Lethal's higher management refused to pay for the bootcamp costs, food, water, electricity, etc. The players were kicked out of the bootcamp for this reason. After their third match, mid-league, they were kicked out of their bootcamp, and they had to chip in money to pay for the late electricity penalty that came because of non-payment of the bill. Amidst all of this, Lethal didn't even pay up the full salary of their head coach Oliphant, who was promised a pretty big salary from Lethal's side, and they managed to pay up only 1/4 of it. And Oliphant, being desperate himself for a little help, went public with this because nobody was seemingly trying to do anything, not even Nodwin. But Lethal, on the other hand, tried to get Nodwin involved in this because they wanted to wash their hands straight off of this. And they made more of a mess than what was already a very messy situation created by Lethal. Owldron Media reported, after talking to Oliphant on Twitter, that the owner refused to pay the rent for the month the players were kicked out. Oliphant also stated that the org always had reasons like bank issues, PayPal issues, multiple times as reasons for not paying on time or not paying at all. A part of the player's salary has also been paid, whilst a huge part of it probably remains unpaid at the moment. The owner refused to pay Kaizen and Rafa's salaries, citing poor performance as a reason, saying that they did not deserve the salary. It was practically just an excuse to get out of paying it. When the players were kicked out of the bootcamp and they paid into and they chipped in to pay the electricity fine, Mazel was actually the one who got all the players safely back home to get practicing for the fourth and final match of the league. Now, this is obviously something, after all that happened, Nodwin doesn't want to be associated with a team like this, or doesn't even want a team like this in their league. Hence, they yeeted Lethal Esports right out of the VCL Split 2, to leaving them stranded to fix their own issues. Internal issues, mismanagements, late payments, which could even include the staff as well at least, bank issues, delay, so on were the multiple reasons that Nodwin probably threw them off the bridge. And I can only imagine what this did to the players themselves. As far as I can think, the team probably had a falling out. I'm pretty sure there would have been disagreements with the org themselves and the players themselves, wanting to have a job and at the same time wanting to compete and, worried about what their next step is going to be now that they're getting kicked out of the league. And all of this with the issues piling up that they just weren't able to perform. They went 0-4 across the entire group stage. Whilst of course Mazel got signed by Aster Army right before the start of Split 2, the others currently are left stranded. I really just hope that they've got paid and the owner again hasn't cited poor performance as a reason to not pay these players. As of right now, Lethal Esports stands in the middle of the ocean, stranded, lost, and possibly dead. We do not know whether the org is going to exist further or not, but I really hope that their higher management and the owner realizes that they're playing with the lives of a lot of people here. Yes, maybe Lethal have some financial or some issues that we do not know about. True. But they made the choice of signing this roster, playing in the VCL, getting them to go to Delhi, do everything for them, and contracted them to Lethal Esports, telling that they will be receiving a salary for their work. And if they don't live up to that, then ironically, they are the ones who are actually breaking a term in the contract that they themselves created. I hope that Lethal Esports understands what is happening. I hope they sort out their issues, whatever it is that they're having, finances and whatnot, and they clear their dues for their players, if at all their staff as well, and whoever it is that is required, because at least if not for the sake of the esports scene, for the livelihood of these players, because Lethal Esports made these choices themselves. Are they going to exist? Well, we're going to find out in the next couple of days.